If you believe in fate, if you believe in the power of love that transcends even death, then you must hear this story. Before we begin, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because what you're about to witness is more than just a tale. It's a revelation. A story of loss, mystery, and a truth that will shake you to your core. The rain had been relentless that morning. Thick, gray clouds hung low over the cemetery, as if the heavens themselves mourned along with her. Evelyn clutched her coat tightly around her frail frame, her fingers trembling as she stepped through the damp grass, making her way to the gravestone she had visited every Sunday for the past 2 years. "Hello, my love," she whispered, kneeling beside the smooth, polished stone. The name Jonathan Grayson was etched deeply into the marble, standing as a permanent reminder of the man she had loved more than life itself. She traced the letters slowly, her breath hitching in her throat. "I miss you." It had been 2 years since she lost him. 2 years of lonely nights, of waking up to an empty side of the bed, of walking through a house that once held laughter but now felt like a mausoleum. Jonathan had been her world, her best friend, her protector, her everything. And then, just like that, he was gone. A heart attack had stolen him away in an instant, leaving Evelyn drowning in grief. She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a small bouquet of lilies, his favorite. She placed them carefully at the base of the gravestone, her fingers lingering over the petals. But as she did, something caught her eye. A single red rose, fresh and vibrant, lying beside the stone. Her heart skipped. Someone else had been here. Evelyn frowned, glancing around the cemetery. There was no one in sight, just the distant sound of rustling trees and the occasional chirp of a bird. She had been visiting this grave every single week, and not once had she seen anyone else leave flowers. Her fingers brushed over the rose, and a strange feeling settled in her chest. It wasn't just the fact that someone had left it, it was the way it was placed, so delicately, so purposefully, as if whoever had done it cared. A gust of wind sent a chill down her spine, and she shook her head. Maybe it was just a kind stranger, someone who had known Jonathan in passing. Maybe she was overthinking it. But then, the next Sunday it happened again. And the Sunday after that. Each time, a single red rose, always fresh, always placed with the same quiet reverence. Evelyn couldn't ignore it anymore. Someone was coming here, just like her. Someone was mourning him, someone who cared, and she needed to find out who. On the 4th Sunday, she arrived earlier than usual, heart pounding as she hid behind a cluster of trees a short distance from the grave. The morning was quiet, the cemetery still drenched in dew. She stood motionless, her breath shallow, eyes locked onto the pathway leading toward Jonathan's final resting place. Then, she saw her, a young black girl, no older than 17, walking hesitantly toward the grave. She wore a simple white dress, her curly hair pulled into a loose ponytail. In her hands, she held a single red rose. Evelyn's chest tightened. Who was she? Why was she here? The girl knelt before the gravestone, her lips moving silently. Then, with careful hands, she placed the rose beside the stone, just like before. Evelyn couldn't stay hidden any longer. She stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Excuse me," the girl gasped, her wide brown eyes snapping up to meet Evelyn's. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating. Evelyn's heart was racing. There was something about the way the girl looked at her. Something familiar, something that made her stomach twist in a way she couldn't explain. "Who are you?" Evelyn finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. The girl hesitated, glancing down at the gravestone, then back at Evelyn. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. And then, without warning, she turned and ran. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "Wait!" she called. But the girl was already disappearing down the cemetery path, her white dress billowing behind her like a ghost in the wind. Evelyn stood frozen, her mind spinning. She didn't know who the girl was. She didn't know why she was here. But one thing was certain. She was mourning Jonathan, and Evelyn needed to know why. Evelyn's heart pounded as she stood there, staring down the path where the girl had disappeared. Who was she? Why had she been leaving roses on Jonathan's grave? The questions twisted in her mind like a storm, but there were no answers. Only the lingering image of that young girl's face, her wide brown eyes filled with something Evelyn couldn't quite place. Grief? Fear? Guilt? Evelyn wasn't sure how long she stood there, frozen in place. The cold wind whipped through the cemetery, but she barely felt it. All she could think about was Jonathan. He had never mentioned a girl like that, at least not to her. She finally tore herself away from the grave and walked back to her car, her hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. She needed to calm down, to think rationally. Maybe the girl was a distant relative. Maybe she was the daughter of one of Jonathan's old friends. But deep down, Evelyn knew that wasn't the case. That girl had looked at Jonathan's grave the way a loved one would, and that terrified her. The rest of the week passed in a blur. Evelyn went about her usual routine, but her mind never left that cemetery. The girl haunted her thoughts, her face appearing in every quiet moment. By the time Sunday arrived again, Evelyn had made a decision. She wasn't leaving without answers. This time she arrived even earlier. The morning was crisp, the sky painted in soft hues of pink and gold. She found a place to hide behind a cluster of trees, her heart hammering in her chest. And then, just like clockwork, the girl appeared. She walked slowly, her posture hesitant, as if she were afraid of being seen. She held another single red rose in her hands, gripping it so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Evelyn watched as she knelt before the grave, her lips moving in a whisper. She couldn't wait any longer. Evelyn stepped out from her hiding place, her voice firm but gentle. "Please don't run." The girl froze. Her fingers trembled around the rose. Evelyn took a careful step closer, trying to ignore the way her pulse thundered in her ears. "I just want to talk." The girl swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the pathway as if she were considering running again. Evelyn raised her hands slightly, a silent plea. "I'm Jonathan's wife," she said softly. I need to understand." At that, something shifted in the girl's expression. Her body sagged slightly, her shoulders lowering as if the weight of whatever she was carrying had suddenly become too much. Evelyn's breath hitched. "Who are you?" The girl opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked down at the gravestone, then back up at Evelyn, and for a split second, something flickered in her gaze, something raw and painful. Then, in the smallest, most broken voice, she whispered, "I'm his daughter." Evelyn's world tilted. She felt her legs go weak, her breath catching in her throat. The words hit her like a freight train, crashing through her chest, shattering every thought in her mind. His daughter. No, that wasn't possible. Jonathan never had a daughter. He would have told her. He wouldn't have kept something like that from her. Evelyn shook her head, her voice barely more than a whisper. No, that can't be true." Tears welled in the girl's eyes, and she clutched the rose even tighter. "It is," she murmured. "I didn't know him well. I barely got the chance. But he was my father." Evelyn staggered back, as if the ground beneath her had crumbled. Her mind reeled, memories flashing through her head. Jonathan had been a devoted husband, kind man. He had loved her deeply. She had never doubted that for a second. So why had he never told her? The girl wiped at her eyes, sniffling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant to upset you. I just wanted to visit him." Evelyn's chest ached. She wanted to deny it, to call this girl a liar. But something in her eyes, something in the way she looked at that gravestone, told Evelyn the truth. This girl wasn't lying. And that meant Jonathan had been keeping a secret. A life-altering, earth-shattering secret. Evelyn's hands clenched at her sides as a mixture of emotions crashed over her. Shock, pain, anger. Who was this girl's mother? How had Jonathan hidden this from her? And the biggest question of all, if he had kept something this big from her, what else had he been hiding? Evelyn's breath came in shallow gasps as she stared at the girl standing before her. The words "I'm his daughter" echoed in her mind, over and over, unraveling everything she thought she knew about the man she had spent most of her life with. Jonathan had been her rock, her soulmate. She had trusted him with every fiber of her being. And now, standing in front of her was living proof that he had kept something from her. Something that changed everything. Evelyn swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. How? How is that possible? The girl shifted uncomfortably, her fingers tightening around the stem of the rose. I don't know everything, she admitted, her voice soft but firm. I only met him once. Evelyn's head snapped up. Once. The girl nodded, blinking back tears. I didn't know about him until last year. My mom. She told me the truth when I turned 16. Evelyn's stomach twisted. Who is your mother? The girl hesitated. Her name is Vanessa Carter. The name sent a shockwave through Evelyn's system. She knew that name. Vanessa had worked at Jonathan's law firm years ago. An ambitious young paralegal who had left suddenly. Evelyn had met her once at a firm event. A polite but distant woman with a sharp mind and quiet demeanor. Jonathan had never mentioned her again. Evelyn took a slow, shaking breath. You're saying your mother and Jonathan? The girl nodded. They had an affair. The words sliced through Evelyn like a knife. She stumbled back, her hands trembling, her world tilting dangerously. She wanted to deny it, to scream that Jonathan would never do that to her. But the way this girl was looking at her, the pain in her eyes, the quiet longing in her voice, told Evelyn that this was no lie. Tears burned at the edges of her vision. When? She croaked. The girl's lips parted, but she hesitated, as if afraid to speak. Then, in a near whisper, she said, 18 years ago. 18 years. Jonathan had been with her, married to her. Evelyn clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms as the reality of it sank in. He had cheated on her, lied to her, and all this time, she had been living in ignorance, believing she had the perfect marriage. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to keep the overwhelming emotions at bay. But there was no stopping the storm raging inside her. The girl sniffled. I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted to know who he was. But by the time I found out the truth, it was too late. He was already gone. Evelyn forced herself to meet the girl's gaze. She was young, barely more than a child, caught in the mess of something she never asked for. And yet, the pain in her eyes told Evelyn that she had lost something too. Evelyn's voice was hoarse. What did he say to you? When you met him? The girl hesitated, her fingers trembling around the rose. He was shocked. He didn't know I existed. My mom never told him. Evelyn's breath hitched. She never told him? The girl shook her head. She said she wanted to protect me, and maybe herself too. But when I found out, I tracked him down. I met him at his office. She swallowed hard. He cried when he saw me. Evelyn felt her knees go weak. He said he was sorry, that he never meant to hurt anyone, that if he had known, he would have been there for me. Her voice broke slightly. But I only got that one day with him, a few hours, and then he was gone. A deep, aching pain wrapped around Evelyn's chest. She could picture it so clearly, Jonathan's kind, regretful eyes, the way he would have tried to fix something he could never change. The man she had loved so deeply had made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but he hadn't even known the truth until the very end. Tears slipped down Evelyn's cheeks. Why didn't you come to me after he died? The girl gave a sad, hollow laugh. How could I? I was just the secret, the mistake. She shook her head. I didn't want to ruin your life. I just wanted to visit him. Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest, trying to catch her breath. She had spent 2 years grieving, believing she knew everything about the man she lost. But now, in the span of a few minutes, she had discovered a part of him she never knew existed. She looked at the girl, Jonathan's daughter. A part of him still here, still breathing, still mourning. And for the first time since this conversation started, Evelyn didn't feel anger. She just felt loss. A loss neither of them could ever undo. Evelyn sat on the cemetery bench, her hands trembling as she tried to process everything. The world around her felt muted, as if she were underwater, drowning in a storm of emotions she couldn't control. Jonathan had a daughter he never knew about until it was too late. The girl, Jonathan's daughter, stood before her, gripping the red rose like it was her only anchor to this moment. There was hesitation in her stance, a wariness that told Evelyn she had expected to be turned away. Evelyn took a slow breath, forcing herself to speak. "What's your name?" The girl blinked as if startled by the question. "Maya," she said quietly. Maya. Jonathan's daughter had a name, and now that Evelyn knew it, she couldn't unhear it, couldn't push away the reality that this girl wasn't just a stranger. She was family. A deep ache spread through her chest. She had spent 2 years grieving, believing she had lost everything. But now, here was this girl, standing before her, carrying a piece of Jonathan with her. And she had been grieving too, alone. Evelyn swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Maya hesitated. "I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Maya lowered her gaze. "That you'd hate me." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "That you'd see me as nothing more than proof of his mistake." The words hit Evelyn like a punch to the gut. She had been so consumed by her own pain, by the betrayal she felt, that she hadn't considered how much courage it had taken for Maya to stand here and face her. Evelyn exhaled shakily. "I don't hate you." The words surprised even her. But as she spoke them, she realized they were true. "I don't know how to feel about all of this, but I don't hate you." Maya looked up at her then, her brown eyes wide with something that looked like relief, like hope. Evelyn wiped at the tears on her face. I don't understand. Why did your mother never tell him?" Maya sighed, shifting uncomfortably. She said she was scared, that it would ruin his life. He was married, and she didn't want to destroy that. She paused, her voice softer. She thought keeping the secret was the best way to protect everyone. Evelyn shook her head. That wasn't her choice to make. "I know," Maya murmured. "I used to be angry at her for it. But now, I don't know. I think she was just trying to survive." Evelyn understood survival all too well. After Jonathan's death, she had spent so many nights just trying to keep breathing, trying to hold herself together when everything inside her felt like it was breaking apart. She glanced at Maya. "Did you love him? Even after just one meeting?" Maya's lips trembled, and she nodded. "Yes, I know it sounds crazy, but when I met him, I felt it, like I belonged, like I had found something I didn't even know I was missing." She sniffled. "And then he was gone." Evelyn's throat tightened. She could see it now. The pain in Maya's eyes wasn't just grief. It was regret. She had lost a father before she even had the chance to know him. And Evelyn had lost the chance to know this part of him, too. She looked back at Jonathan's gravestone, the name carved so carefully into the marble. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, had been imperfect. He had made mistakes. But he had also been a good man, a man who had spent his final moments trying to make things right. Evelyn turned back to Maya, something shifting inside her. "You've been coming here every Sunday?" Maya nodded. "I didn't know any other way to feel close to him." Evelyn hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "Next Sunday, I'd like to come with you." Maya's eyes widened. "You would?" Evelyn nodded. "We both lost him. Maybe we don't have to grieve him alone." For the first time, a small, fragile smile appeared on Maya's face. And as Evelyn looked at her, really looked at her, she realized something. Jonathan may have left this world, but a part of him was still standing here, in front of her. And maybe, just maybe, that was something worth holding on to. The following Sunday, Evelyn stood at the cemetery gates, her heart pounding. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass, and the sky was a pale shade of blue, the kind Jonathan used to love. She clutched a bouquet of white lilies in her trembling hands. A week ago, she had come here alone, believing she was the only one mourning him. But today she wasn't alone. Maya was waiting for her near Jonathan's grave, holding a single red rose, just as she always did. Her expression was uncertain, like she was still afraid Evelyn might change her mind. Evelyn took a deep breath and walked toward her. For the first few minutes, they stood in silence, both staring at the gravestone. The weight of everything that had happened in the past week still pressed against Evelyn's chest. She had spent nights lying awake, replaying every memory of Jonathan, searching for signs she had missed. Had he ever felt guilty? Had he ever wanted to tell her the truth? She would never know. But one thing was clear, he hadn't been a perfect man. And yet she had loved him. "I brought these," Evelyn said softly, kneeling to place the lilies beside the headstone. They were his favorite. Maya glanced at her, then smiled faintly. "Mine too." Evelyn's heart clenched. There were still so many things they didn't know about each other. So many gaps that had been left by Jonathan's absence. But standing here, side by side, those gaps didn't seem as impossible to fill. Maya exhaled shakily. "I used to wish I had more time with him. Just one more day. One more conversation." She looked down at the grave. "But I guess we don't always get the time we think we deserve." Evelyn's fingers curled into her palms. "No, we don't." For so long, she had been angry. Angry that Jonathan had been taken from her too soon. Angry that she had been left alone with nothing but memories. But now, she realized something. She wasn't alone. She turned to Maya. "Tell me about him, the Jonathan you met." Maya's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected the question. Then slowly she smiled. "He was kind. He was nervous when I walked into his office. But the moment he realized who I was, he hugged me. He didn't even hesitate." Her voice wavered. "I remember thinking that I had never been hugged like that before. Like I truly belonged to someone." Evelyn swallowed hard. That was the Jonathan she knew. The man who loved fiercely, even when it hurt. The man who would have done anything to make things right, if only he had the chance. Maya let out a small, sad laugh. "And he was terrible at drinking coffee. He dumped so much sugar into it. I thought he was joking. But he just smiled and said, 'Life's too short for bitter coffee.'" Evelyn let out a soft chuckle. "That sounds like him." The tension between them, once heavy and unbearable, felt lighter now. The pain was still there, but it was different, less isolating, less suffocating. Maya hesitated, then spoke in a whisper. "Do you think he would have wanted me in his life?" Evelyn turned to her, really looking at her. Jonathan's eyes stared back at her, filled with the same depth, the same quiet longing. "Yes," Evelyn said firmly. "I think he would have loved you more than anything." Maya's lips trembled, and for the first time since they met, she let the tears fall freely. Evelyn reached out, hesitating only for a second before pulling her into a gentle embrace. They stood there, holding on to each other, bound not by the past but by the love of a man they both had lost. And for the first time since Jonathan's death, Evelyn didn't feel like she was mourning alone. She had lost a husband, but maybe, just maybe, she had gained something too.